folks, Troy Anderson here from Alpha Kettlebell Fitness. Just wanted to share with you a few quick tips on the 5 flaws that most people have with their kettlebell swings. For my take on the whole thing, the kettlebell swing's most valuable components, so let's start about the most valuable thing about them to start with, is to create hip hinge and then ultimately to create hip hinge with an overspeed eccentric. So what I mean here, and kind of what it looks like, is as such. So we're going to be from the standing position, we're going to hinge back at the hips, so just as such, nice and easy, and then we're going to speed up that eccentric or that downstroke motion here. We're working on getting fully extended from the body all the way up and through as such. So those are the 2 most important things. Where most people make their critical flaw with it, and it kind of leads into all these 5 components I'm about to share with you, is a squat swing. So they do something that looks like this. And so we take a lot of that value from the hip hinge component because then we become quad dominant knee bend. So our knee becomes our dominant moving joint as opposed to the hip being the dominant moving joint. And that takes all that away from it in regards to the hip hinge and then ultimately hip hinge with speed of the overspeed eccentric. So the squat swing, while it may feel hard, you're not getting the most out of it, and it's very difficult for me to do there. So that's number 1 flaw, is to squat swing with it. Number 2 is, especially this is really true for guys, is they start to muscle it. So what they'll do is they might swing just a little bit, but it's because we don't know how to hip hinge and then create force from the hip hinge or speed from the hip hinge, they'll do this. And we won't get much. And you'll be able to recognize that if you're a coach, because you'll see people get tensioning up to their arms. Another great way to do it is if they're a little bit weaker at it, and they have maybe a heavier kettlebell, they'll lift up as such, and the bottom of the kettlebell will be pointed at the ground. So there's number 2 flaw, is muscling, especially for men muscling from the upper body. Number 3 flaw is what I call going below the knee with it. Some people call it whatever it may be, but going below the knee is when people are out here and they're swinging like this. You can see the kettlebell, if you look at me from the profile, passes below my knee. What that does is we're not holding our leveraging, so we're not holding our neutral spine or our posture, and what that does is create a big potential for us to get some tweaks in the low back or anywhere in the back. So we want to come back above the knee, so as opposed to letting gravity yank us down. And a lot of times if we have people that can hip hinge well, that just means that they're not getting back quickly enough in that overspeed eccentric from the top position. But whatever we do, we always cue people to come back above the knee, catch their forearms here. So that's the number 3 flaw. Now we're going to talk about a couple benefits by doing those 3 things, or benefits that you're missing out on if you do those 3 flaws. Number 1 benefit is when we do well, just like we talked about on the last segment there, going below the knee, if we're not holding our posture well, we're missing out on that isometric bracing. That's so very important. So we need to keep good posture all the way through, and we don't want to allow it to buckle us forward. A, it ups our injury potential. B, we miss out on the core or the isometric bracing that we can get through our core. That's that upside benefit, that added little benefit. Beyond just being a hard conditioning workout, we get that kind of bracing and stimulation that we really can value, and getting the most bang from our buck from every single minute that we're spending doing our kettlebell swings. And our 5th and final flaw or benefit that we're missing out on is when we don't use the kettlebell with the hip hinge and then using it for even more speed of the overspeed eccentric, we miss completely out on the dynamic hip flexor stretch. So if we're doing a squatting swing where we're doing something like this instead of the hip hinge and firing our glutes through as such, we miss out on the reciprocal inhibition because we're firing our glutes through. We're getting the front side or the hip flexor side stretched out in that dynamic motion. So glutes fire from the hip hinge that we've gone into hip flexion, hip extension. Hip flexors have to be stretched. If we're doing this, we're not getting nearly the degree of that. So there's your 5 kettlebell flaws or kettlebell swing flaws, and the number 1 reason or number 1 value for the kettlebell swings, which is hip hinge and hip hinge with speed. So you're looking at muscling it. If you're guys, don't lift it with the arms. Don't knee bend it. Don't let it pass below the knees when you're hip hinging, and then you're missing out on those. If you're doing those three things, you're really missing out on your isometric core activation, your bracing, and the dynamic hip flexor stretch. So hopefully you got a few good tips out of this video on how to maybe clean up those swings a little bit if you're using them for yourself or your clients, and come back and check out some of our videos at Alpha Kettlebell Fitness and at KettlebellFatLossTrain.com. Have a great day.